Don't drink that. The scream cut through the most luxurious restaurant in the city like a blade, causing hundreds of wealthy people to choke on their own silence. A waitress, poor, new, invisible, held the arm of the most powerful man in the region, while he stared at her as if she were dirt stuck to his shoe. Richard Sterling, accustomed to ordering around judges, businessmen, and entire destinies, pointed his finger at her face and snarled for the whole hall to hear. You are nothing but useless. People like you should lower your heads and be thankful just to be breathing near me. What no? One there imagined was that there was a real reason for that scream echoing through the hall, and that the only person fighting to avoid the worst was exactly the one he was treating like garbage. Richard Sterling froze completely, as if he were a marble statue carved by a renowned master. The glass remained suspended in the air, balanced between his tanned hand and his face, with striking aristocratic features. His eyes, completely habituated to dominating entire rooms with a simple, disinterested and glacial look, plunged onto the waitress as if she were a microscopic detail he had just stepped on under his solid mahogany table, imported directly from the Amazon rainforest. Around him, in that restaurant absolutely packed with important and wealthy people, pockets of people simultaneously stopped their sophisticated conversations. Experienced waiters froze in their tracks, their trays remaining in the air as if suspended. Multi-millionaire business executives and the city's wealthy socialites exchanged looks of absolute shock that reverberated through every corner of the space. No one said no to Richard Sterling, no one in the known history of this city, and much less a simple woman in a well-pressed black uniform, with her hair tied in a tight bun and worn-out shoes, who had seen the job advertisement in a cheap printed newspaper. How dare you? The words came through Richard's teeth like a capital death sentence pronounced by a supreme judge. His face, completely accustomed only to the obsequious smiles of professional flatterers and perpetual sycophants, contorted in pure fury that burned red-hot through every pore of his skin. Do you really know who you are talking to? I am Richard Sterling. My grandfather founded businesses that move billions in international cash flows. My father expanded this to double the volume, and I turned it into an empire that crosses borders. I can buy this entire restaurant and fire you in exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes is all I need. His finger shot toward Elena's face like a weapon ready to fire, pointing with absolute contempt that came from entire decades of impunity guaranteed by his money. Get away from me, you mediocre incompetent. Your parents must be ashamed to have brought you into this world. You are a mistake walking uncomfortably on 2 legs. The silence that followed the noise was suffocating, palpable, almost visible, like the thick glass separating 2 completely different worlds. Elena felt the colossal weight of hundreds of eyes on her, each of them waiting with pure anticipation for her to be completely demoralized, for her to apologize torn with tears, for her to disappear like dissipated smoke. Her heart raced like a frenetic drum inside her chest, hammering against her ribs, but she breathed deeply through her nose, centering herself mentally on her greater purpose. There was a very important reason for having done that at that exact moment. A terrible reason that had been consuming her for days. A reason that weighed more than her own mortal fear of losing such a precious job. Her fingers still trembled as she indicated the glass with a low and controlled voice, even while Richard gesticulated furiously and threateningly, with violent and uncontrolled gestures. Mr. Sterling, I cannot let you drink this right now. Not because I am afraid of losing the job I got with so much effort and personal sacrifice. Not because you assure me with your threats, which I hear echoing through all the passages of this intimidating place since my first day here working as a waitress. I cannot let you drink this because there is poison in this wine, real poison, that will kill you slowly and invisibly. A silent scream, almost invisible but devastating, ran through the room like a deadly electric current that froze every person present. The manager, Charles, a 52-year-old man with a face always carefully directed in a professional neutral expression, rushed toward Elena with long steps that echoed. His face was a mix of absolute panic and dangerous controlled fury. The other waiters around opened their mouths without being able to say anything. their bodies trapped between the desperate impulse to flee and the corporate need to remain in that place. And Richard Sterling, whose life had been built on the absolute dominion of every situation he faced, whose word was unquestionable law in every room he occupied with his magnetic presence, examined that waitress as if she had just said the building was collapsing and burning simultaneously in a total apocalypse. "Are you calling my wine poisoned?" Richard's voice was now dangerously low and controlled, like a tiger attacking its unprotected prey. "You, a mediocre and insignificant employee who hasn't even been in this five-star establishment for 2 months, are accusing me of something like this? This is clear and simple slander. This is grave defamation, proven. This is grounds for devastating personal, multiple corporate, and criminal lawsuits that would last years in the courts." But Elena did not back down even 1 millimeter. Her eyes met his directly without blinking, and there was a courage there that no money in the world could buy or completely destroy. "I am not accusing anyone of anything lightly or rashly, Mr. Sterling. I am here essentially, genuinely trying to save your life at this exact moment, before it is too late for any action." In that instant frozen in time, when the fate of everyone present hung by an invisible thread, Elena understood that she had just said the words that would change everything forever. What had started as a common workday in a luxurious restaurant was turning into something much bigger, much darker, much more dangerous than anything she could have imagined in her 25 years of modest life. The days that followed the explosive incident at the prestige restaurant were the tensest of Elena's life. She returned to work as if nothing of real importance had happened, but everything around her had changed fundamentally and irrevocably. People whispered constantly when she passed through the hallways carrying refined trays of fine porcelain. Some powerful business executives loomed over her like pillars of luxury circling prey, wanting to know her better, as if courage were a contagious disease they could magically contract just by proximity. Other regular customers avoided her completely, fearing being associated with the chaos she had generated that night. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed completely. There was tension in the air that didn't exist before, a sense of imminent danger that stretched like a shadow over every meal. Charles, the experienced manager who had commanded the restaurant for almost 3 decades, maintained a strategic and careful professional distance. There was palpable fear stamped in his eyes now. And Elena understood with wisdom acquired over the days that he knew much more than he had said or revealed on that chaotic night. Perhaps comments about Marcus and his international criminal network. Perhaps it was an integral part of the original plan from the beginning. Perhaps he had discovered what would make him complicit on some level of complicity, but he revealed nothing beyond what was necessary for his own corporate survival. He just did his job with robotic precision and mechanical efficiency, like a robot programmed, solely and exclusively to survive the approaching chaos. On Thursday night, after the explosive incident that had changed everything, Richard returned to the restaurant like a ghost returning to his favorite place obsessively. He was absolutely alone this time, without his usual companions who always surrounded him like lions around a king, without his businessmen whispering sophisticated financial strategies in his ears. Just a magnificent and terrible man, sitting at his usual table in the corner, with the best view of the entire hall, reading the menu as if no one knew him, as if he hadn't been almost poisoned a week before in a public place. Elena felt her stomach tighten when she saw him enter, every fiber of her body sending absolute alert signals that pierced her nerves. Danger, danger, approach, retreat, contradictory storm of emotions. But she was a professional above all. She was Elena Vega, daughter of Martha. You can try. She approached the table with the sophistication she had learned in 2 intense weeks of working in this exquisite establishment. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Today's menu is too exceptional to be ignored. I especially recommend the filet mignon, with a red wine reduction from imported French vineyards and the seafood and Sicilian lemon sauce that our chef prepared personally. Richard looked at her with complete attention that made her feel exposed and vulnerable in a way she had never experienced before. His eyes were no longer cold, like before that first explosive confrontation. There was something there that Elena couldn't name exactly with precision. genuine interest, deep curiosity, unexpected respect for her courage. "Elena," he said simply, and her name on his lips sounded important and significant. "Sit down for a moment. Sit down for just 5 minutes. I need to speak with you seriously, and I absolutely refuse to shout for the whole restaurant to hear every word we will say here." Elena looked around nervously, her intuition screaming warnings. Charles watched their interaction from afar, his face a mix of morbid curiosity and genuine worry that was transparent in every feature. The customers at nearby tables feigned disinterest with absolute dedication while observing them obsessively with disguised and veiled looks. She pulled out a chair slowly and sat down, her hands resting nervously on the wooden table. "On the night you saved me from certain and imminent death," Richard began with an active tone that carried emotional weight, "you told me your mother taught you that money doesn't buy respect, that humiliating the weak has a terrible price, that dignity is not sold for gold or power. These are very particular and sophisticated ideas. Where exactly did that come from deep in your heart?" Elena took a deep breath through her nose, recognizing that there was no reasonable reason to hide the truth now. "My mother worked her entire life as a professional housekeeper in luxury homes and luxury buildings. She cleaned penthouses where rich and morally rotten people resided their days. She saw wealth constantly in every comfort, saw power in every expensive object, but she also saw people completely rotten on the inside, people who bought absolutely everything except genuine character that cannot be bought with money. She taught me that this was worth absolutely nothing, in fact, that a decent person is worth much more than any accumulated wealth." "And you believe that completely?" asked Richard with penetrating intensity that was frightening. "Really? Is it not just something you say to impress or seem better than you are?" "Yes, sir," Elena replied with deep sincerity coming from her guts. "I believe completely and absolutely." Richard leaned back in his chair with the natural grace of someone used to owning space and dominating environments. And a smile, a genuine smile this time that reached his eyes tired of power, crossed his face like a ray of golden light. "Then you are rare, very rare indeed in this corrupt and greedy world, because the absolute majority of people on this planet believe only in money and material power that consumes everything. And those who don't believe were taught by life to lie systematically about it to physically survive." He paused dramatically as he observed the restaurant around him with thoughtful and calculating eyes. "I want to make a deal with you. A deal that will change your life completely and forever. A deal." Elena felt mistrust wash over her completely, like water invading a ship. Deals with men notably ended well for people like her, who possessed no sophisticated legal defenses. "My grandfather founded this restaurant in 1978, Richard explained with pure nostalgia that carried emotion and memory. "He was a deeply just and honest man, a man who treated his employees like legitimate family members. When he died, I inherited the place, but I didn't inherit his noble and humanistic philosophy sincerely. I turned it into a cold machine for making money without scruples, and it started to rot slowly from the inside out like fruit left in the open. People like Marcus flourished and thrived because the rest of the environment was too toxic and corrupt." He stood up slowly, walked with calculated steps to the large window that offered a perfect view of the shining city and its millions of blinking lights in the dark night. "You are going to be the operational manager of the Prestige restaurant," Richard continued, with a voice that sounded like Final Destiny. "You will work in partnership with Charles, keeping him in his charge, but your greater responsibility will be to ensure that every employee is treated with inviolable dignity, that every customer is treated with honesty, and that no one ever tries to rot this place with corruption again." Elena felt the entire world shake under her feet like an impending earthquake. "Sir, I have only 2 months of experience here in, this place. I have no formal management qualification from college. I have no experience in corporate administration or—" "You have exactly the experience I need," Richard interrupted with unquestionable firmness. "You have unshakable principles that are not sold for any price. You have courage that defies death with tranquility, and you saved my life when you had absolutely nothing to gain from it materially. You would have had nothing to lose. That is worth more than any MBA from an elite university in the world. In that profound and transforming instant, Elena understood that the true humiliation was still to come, because it wasn't just her being tested in that moment. It was Charles being knocked off his pedestal of authority. It was Richard himself somehow being humbled by the revelation of his corporate blindness. It was the entire system allowing corruption to flourish like an uncontrolled plague. Elena's true story had begun long before that explosive and charged moment at the internationally famous and dubiously renowned Prestige restaurant. She grew up in a peripheral neighborhood where streets had popular names instead of sequential and cold numbers, where houses squeezed against each other like people on a crowded bus during afternoon rush hour. Her mother, Martha, a woman of strong bones and unshakable determination, worked as a professional housekeeper in luxury buildings scattered throughout the entire city. She woke up before dawn, still dark and full of cold dew. She returned when the night had already completely covered the city with its dark mantle, heavy as lead. Her father had disappeared when Elena was exactly 3 years old, leaving only incomplete and fragmented stories, photographs faded by relentless time, and the deep feeling of a void that no explanation could fill during her childhood. But Martha was a woman of true steel, forged in the fire of constant difficulties and challenges. Her eyes carried the unshakable determination of someone who had no time for easy despair or self-pity. She taught Elena from early childhood that dignity had no measurable price in money, that working honestly was a form of sacred and transcendental art, and that never, under any possible circumstance, should she allow anyone to treat her as inferior. "You can try," she would say, every time life tried to defeat her with its repetitive and relentless blows like constant waves in the ocean. "But you won't manage to break me." That phrase became Elena's central mantra, repeated mentally in moments of deep doubt and impending despair that assaulted her. "You can try." Those two simple words carried the entire philosophy of resistance her mother had developed over a lifetime of hard work. At 25, Elena had finished difficult high school, working during the day in various temporary jobs, and studying at night in overcrowded public schools. Her eyes heavy with accumulated fatigue, but sure as pure iron. Too young for easy hopelessness and resistance. Too old for childish illusions that someone would magically save her from her situation. When she got the job at the Prestige restaurant, exactly 2 months before everything happened, Martha cried for the first time in many years of constant struggle, not of pure and simple joy like a childish celebration, but that deep and weighted joy of someone who knows that every victory won is one more vital thread of hope in a life that knew few threads. The salary was better than anything Elena had earned before in her entire life of hard work. The tips could be overly generous in an establishment where rich men left money as if it were discarded paper. It was a chance, a true chance for possible transformation. The first days working there were pure hell of constant insecurity that wore her down emotionally. Elena carried heavy trays with fingers that trembled with genuine nervousness and fear. She arranged tables with an obsessive precision that bordered on madness, obsessively counting the steps between one point and another in the exact geometry of the space. The other professional waiters, many of them children of rich people working on a whim, ignored her completely, as if she were invisible and too incorporated. She was totally transparent, a gear without importance in a luxury machine that functioned perfectly without her significant personal contribution. Then, about exactly 3 weeks before that explosive confrontation in the main hall of the restaurant, something changed permanently and irreversibly, which would mark forever the destiny of everyone involved. Elena was cleaning a professional kitchen during the night shift, when the main team had retired home to their comfortable houses, when she heard a heated discussion coming from the private room where Richard Sterling often dined alone in deep contemplation, or with half a dozen equally terrifying and internationally powerful businessmen. She couldn't clearly hear what she should have ignored with intelligence. She was simply doing her daily job, carrying platters of fine and expensive porcelain to the industrial professional dishwasher, when voices leaked through the slightly open doors like toxic and invasive smoke filling the space. "It's too perfect to be true," said the voice of a man Elena didn't recognize. A voice hoarse from consumed cigarettes and distilled alcohol abused over many years. He is wanted in at least 3 different states for serious and unforgivable crimes. Gambling debt that will never be satisfactorily settled because the amount is colossal. Violent conflicts with very dangerous international people who neither forgive nor forget, nor ever sleep. If the wine is poisoned slowly in small and invisible doses over entire weeks, no one will connect the real dots. Elena's heart had stopped at that exact moment, as if time had frozen completely around her, as if she had entered another parallel world. She froze entirely, a delicate china platter still in her hands, trembling dramatically while the other voice responded, and she immediately recognized the melodic and always controlled voice of Marcus, the restaurant's sophisticated sommelier, that charming and elegant man who frequently suggested wines to wealthy customers with that smile that seemed too genuine, who wore an expensive bow tie and a suit that probably cost more than the rent of an entire apartment. "And when he is dead and buried deep," said Marcus with a coldness that chilled the bones, "who assumes the business and billionaire inheritance? The children don't have the true father's strategic intelligence. They don't have his sharp instinct for money and markets. There will be absolute chaos in international markets when everything falls. And we will be there waiting strategically to reap the rewards when everything collapses and crumbles. Completely." Elena let a platter fall with force, echoing through the entire kitchen. The noise of porcelain breaking on the kitchen floor was loud, shrill, completely cutting the illusion of invisibility she cultivated so carefully every day. The voices stopped immediately, as if someone had hit a pause button on the entire universe, freezing time. She ran out through the professional kitchens, panic accelerating in her veins like distilled poison. And no one questioned her, because she had simply disappeared into the hallways and dense shadows of that immense and frightening kitchen. From that day on, Elena did what any normal person in her place would do in desperation. Absolutely nothing of importance, because reporting it was too dangerous for someone without real corporate protection, because speaking meant entering into violent conflict with people she believed would be too terrifying and relentless, because it was much easier to pretend she had never heard anything, that she had never seen anything, to remain invisible and safe as if nothing happened. But Elena had her mother at home, in her small, modest apartment, who waited daily. She had a mother who worked harder, every day as age advanced relentlessly without mercy. She had a mother who had taught her that money did not buy respect, that humiliating the weak had too high a price, and she had the heavy truth in her heart like lead, and the truth weighs like a massive granite stone in the chest. So, on the night of the special banquet that would change everything permanently, when Richard arrived at his usual time without fail, when Marcus appeared with the glass of red wine, specially prepared for that night with extreme care, meticulously planned, Elena did the only thing her mother taught her to do. With absolute truth, protected someone who couldn't protect themselves alone. Even if it was a man too rich and powerful, even if it was too dangerous to confront, even if it meant destroying everything she had built in 2 months in that place that was already starting to feel like a safe home, she intercepted the glass with unshakable and pure determination. She said the words that would echo through the corridors of history. And now, looking into the cold and calculating eyes of Richard Sterling, she knew that the true confrontation was just beginning, because public humiliation was the least of the consequences she would face. Marcus had disappeared into the back of the kitchen when the absolute chaos began, and Richard Sterling still didn't really understand why an insignificant waitress had risked absolutely everything to save him from certain death. "Are you trying to say that someone tried to poison me in a premeditated way?" Richard's voice had completely changed its quality and deep tone. It went from hot red fury to something colder, more calculating, more dangerous than any conventional verbal threat he could offer. He placed the glass carefully on the mahogany table, as if handling explosives that could detonate at any unforeseen moment. Around them, the entire restaurant held its collective breath in perfect synchronicity. Someone had started filming discreetly with a cell phone hidden under a tablecloth. An executive at the next table whispered urgent instructions to his companion with gestures that trembled. The waiters exchanged looks of pure uncertainty and existential fear that froze veins. Elena felt the ground disappearing completely under her feet like quicksand, but kept her voice firm and controlled, despite the fear consuming her entirely. Approximately 21 days ago, I heard a very specific conversation between Marcus, this restaurant sommelier, and another man I couldn't identify with certainty on that specific occasion. They were speaking in precise details about poisoning you slowly in careful steps over weeks or full months, to make it look completely natural, like a death by natural causes that no one would question. They spoke about billions of dollars, about their secret businesses, about inheritance that would be disputed among your children. Charles, the manager with gray hair and a face always professionally cared for, had run up close to Elena with steps that echoed through the immense space, his face a mix of absolute paleness that frightened and palpable visceral panic. This is complete madness. It is absolutely uncontrolled madness. Mr. Sterling, this employee is completely uninformed. Perhaps she is mentally ill. Perhaps she has severe visual and auditory hallucinations. Total silence, thundered Richard with the force of someone used to being obeyed instantly without question. Elena, right? He was studying her now, as if seeing her for the first time for real, as if challenging his understanding that a person could do what she had done. Why did you wait 21 whole days to tell this? Why didn't you send for the police immediately after hearing? The question burned like absolute fire in her chest. Elena took a deep breath through her nose, trying to find words to explain the unfolding of her actions. Because I have genuine fear of dying. Because I am just a waitress without importance in this powerful world. Because I have no solid proof of anything other than fragmented words heard through an open door. Because I have no legal documentation, I have no witnesses willing to speak publicly and lose everything, because people like me disappear when they face people like... She stopped abruptly, not finishing the sentence for fear of offending the powerful man even more. No need to complete the thought, Richard completed, and a very small smile, almost invisible, passed quickly over his lips like a passing shadow. Interesting and insightful observation. Therefore, you had genuine fear of formally accusing me in public, but you didn't have fear of warning me about certain death. Why exactly? Because letting someone die would be a winning cause for the devil, even if it was someone rich, Elena replied with deep sincerity, coming from her most intimate convictions. My mother always said that money and status don't matter at all when the question is right versus wrong. And this, she pointed to the poisonous glass with a firm finger, is absolutely and inescapably wrong. Richard rose from his chair with a calculated slowness that drew the attention of everyone present. He was a 62-year-old man, hair completely white like fresh snow, body still muscular from a private expensive gym, and discreet cosmetic surgeries that cost incalculable fortunes. His suit cost more than Elena earned in 6 months of intense work. When he walked, people involuntarily moved out of the way like a sea parting. He moved toward Elena until he was so close she could smell the warm aroma of his expensive Italian perfume imported directly from Milan. His eyes examined every detail of her face with the precision of instruments, as if searching for revealing signs of lie or deep deception. Are you pure courage or absolute madness? He asked simply. You can try to find out, Elena replied. And the phrase came out as a direct challenge and a solemn promise at the same time. Richard took a few steps back carefully. His face returned to being opaque, impossible to read, like smoked glass no one can see through. He took his phone, a golden device that probably had functionalities the rest of the population would never discover existed, and dialed a memory number that clearly wasn't common or public. Bring Marcus here right now, and bring Victor Russo too if you can find him. Now means literally in the next 3 minutes or your children will grow up without a father, said Richard with the tone of someone who doesn't expect any refusal. And then he hung up without waiting for an answer or confirmation. The entire restaurant trembled under an invisible and palpable vibration. Not physically with earthquakes, but there was a vibration of pure power radiating from Richard Sterling and contaminating the air like poisonous smoke. People stood up slowly, some collecting bags and coats urgently, others froze in place, curiosity completely winning over corporate common sense. Charles ran from one side to the other, muttering incoherent sentences into his corporate phone. Elena felt a firm hand on her waist, turned, and saw a man she knew from occasional walks through the restaurant. Thomas, the head of security with a permanently serious face, the one responsible for the entry and exit of internationally important and dangerous people. His face was a professional mask revealing nothing of importance. "I need you to come with me right now," said Thomas with a tone that admitted no refusal or discussion. "Mr. Sterling wants you kept safe in a private room, away from everyone." "Safe from whom?" asked Elena, her heart beating too fast. "From everyone who wants you to disappear permanently," Thomas replied so simply and directly that the truth hurt physically. She was taken to a small room in the back of the establishment, a storage room that had been modified for this purpose, where there was a television displaying security cameras from every angle of the entire restaurant in sharp, high definition. Thomas placed 2 security guards standing outside the door as impassive sentinels, and Elena finally understood, with absolute clarity, that she had unleashed something that was far beyond her capacity for understanding or personal control. 10 minutes later, through the camera focusing on the main entrance of the prestige restaurant, where taxis constantly stopped, she saw Marcus brought practically by force by 2 men who were not known security guards of the restaurant. They wore black uniforms suggesting sophisticated international private agencies, security corporations operating globally. The type of company Richard Sterling could activate at the speed of a phone call. Marcus was pale as a freshly dug corpse. His hands trembled visibly even through the distant camera. He looked constantly back and to the sides, as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist in any possible universe. Elena saw when Richard moved toward him in the vicinity of the main hall, with measured and controlled steps. She participated in a conversation through the audio of the security cameras that was connected to the surveillance system. "You helped kill me," said Richard. And it wasn't a question expecting an honest answer. "I didn't," Marcus began, his voice breaking like fine glass. "You talked to a man named Victor Russo about my slow and calculated poisoning and about my hidden investments in international accounts that you remembered no one knew. You are a stupid man, Marcus. Exceptionally stupid for someone who worked in a sophisticated environment, because someone heard every word you pronounced that night." Marcus scanned the room with desperate eyes. He saw Elena through the security camera displaying the private room where she was confined. His eyes made visual contact with her through the glass and cameras, and in that look was a clear promise of future personal revenge that frightened her deeply. He would consider her. He knew it had been her. "Do you want me to fire him?" said Richard, his voice containing absolute power that decides human destinies. Yes, fire me. I offer sincere apologies." "I beg you," replied Marcus quickly, very quickly, with desperation showing in every syllable of his trembling speech. "Firing is extreme generosity," said Richard calmly and coldly, "because what you deserved was delivery straight to the federal police. What you deserved was a prison cell for the rest of your days, but there is a reason you are still alive at this moment." Richard made a discreet signal with his head. The security guards grabbed Marcus by the back and dragged him out of the restaurant, visible on all security. Cameras. There was desperate screaming. There was a violent physical fight. There were empty and pleading promises. But Marcus was weak. He was a coward in his essence. He was a man made only of pure falsehood and empty ambition. When it all ended, only the heavy silence of a secret remained. Now, exposed to the scrutiny of people who would never forget. And Elena, observing everything through the high-definition cameras, understood she had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. A dangerous secret had been revealed to Richard Sterling, and now he knew things about her that made her dangerous or useful, perhaps both simultaneously. The question tormenting her was, what would he do with her now? Charles appeared in the office where Elena had been taken by Thomas. The head of security knew something important and dangerous was at stake, but his loyalty now seemed deeply divided. "You need to leave here today still," said Charles with urgency that transposed pure fear. "Now, tonight. You don't really understand the size of what you opened by saving him." "What?" asked Elena with obvious confusion. What does that mean? Why do you continue acting as if you hear much more? Charles closed the door carefully and breathed deeply. His shoulders seemed to collapse under the weight of a heavy confession carried for years. Exactly 3 years ago, Charles began, I discovered that Marcus wasn't just a bit incompetent. He was a sophisticated courier, a person who transported strategic information, untracked money, forged documents between different criminal factions. And the Prestige restaurant was a strategic meeting point. Elena felt the cold go down her spine like ice water. Did Richard know wisely? She asked, needing to understand the complete truth. No, replied Charles. At least not consciously in a deliberate way, but his blindness was too convenient for the men who really controlled this place. A powerful businessman is useful. A powerful businessman who doesn't know he is involved in illegal activities is even more useful because he can be blamed at any moment. So who really controls this place? Asked Elena. Charles motioned to a portrait on the wall. An old photo framed in glass of a man in his early 70s with a uniform Elena recognized. It was the federal police. Commissioner Evans, said Charles in a whisper, retired 10 years ago, but retiring for men like him only means more freedom to do criminal activities. Elena felt the puzzle pieces fitting together, and none of them were good or comforting. So, an investigation that is coming isn't legitimate, completed Charles with the tone of someone revealing the darkest truth. It is a carefully orchestrated political execution. They are going to arrest Richard for serious crimes he didn't commit deliberately. They are going to offer him as a political sacrifice for some more ambitious investigator who wants to make a career. And you? He looked at Elena, with a mix of genuine weight and admission. You are an inconvenient witness because you heard Marcus mention Victor Russo. And Victor Russo isn't just a common name, it is an operational code. It is a war name of a sophisticated operative of Commissioner Evans. The office door opened violently. Without warning, Thomas entered quickly, his face a mask of extreme conflict between loyalty and morality. I need both of you to leave through a back exit few know about, he said with urgency. Right now. There are men in front of the restaurant insisting on asking for you, Elena. They don't look. They like legitimate federal police. They look private. They look too mean. Elena moved as if by an external mechanism she couldn't control. Her feet carried her to the trembling window. And there, outside the establishment, she saw 2 men wearing dark suits that didn't match anyone in the city. They waited patiently like predators, patiently like felines knowing the prey has nowhere to truly run. Charles and Thomas led Elena through the empty kitchen. The kitchen was strangely calm, with only the permanent chef and 1 or 2 night assistants working in silence. No one questioned her when she passed. No one did anything other than lower their eyes in recognition that something dangerous was happening. There was a door leading to the back of the building, a dark alley, a side street few knew or used regularly. Thomas placed a trembling phone in Elena's hands. Call your mother now, he said with a tone. Tell her you'll be away for a few days. Don't say where, don't say why, just go, disappear. Where to? Asked Elena, and her voice sounded like a stranger in her own body. To anywhere Commissioner Evans cannot reach with his international resources, replied Thomas. Go fast. Very fast. Elena made the call to her mother with trembling hands. She explained the necessary, without revealing dangerous details. Martha understood immediately that something serious had happened. The mother had lived enough to consider the danger in a voice. You can try, whispered Martha on the phone, repeating the mantra that had sustained both. But you won't manage it, Mom. I have to go now, said Elena. Go, I will be here when you return, replied Martha with calm that contradicted the situation. Elena left through the dark side street, her backpack on her back, her uncertain future before her like dense fog. There was only one thing she knew for sure. She had opened a can of worms that couldn't be closed again. She had unleashed struggles that were far beyond her personal control, and now she needed to survive what was to come. Elena stayed in a cheap motel in the most dangerous outskirts of the city for 2 whole days that compensated for 2 infinite weeks. 2 days where she didn't eat right, where the old and creaking TV in the room was always listening to news that left her more terrified with every hour that passed. Richard had been formally arrested in his home late in the afternoon, formally accused of international corruption and association with organized crime. The media exploded with sensationalist stories of corruption, of unlikely criminal connections, of illicit deals he personally coordinated. But nowhere was there any true mention of poisoning. Instead, there was a complete narrative of how Richard had been framed. On the third day of this agonizing weight consuming her soul, when Elena was considering very seriously never leaving that cramped and smelly room, her phone rang shatteringly with a vibration that frightened her. A Royale. Number she didn't recognize from anywhere. "Speak," said a voice she distinguished by the unique and grave timbre. "Richard, how did you get this number?" asked Elena, panic accelerating in her chest like a frenetic drum. "I have resources even inside a federal prison cell," replied Richard with frightening naturalness, suggesting power even behind bars. "I got the connection through a very well-paid and loyal lawyer. Elena, you are the only living person who can help me now. This situation is impossible. You are absolutely the only one who knows the complete truth about that night." "I can't help you," said Elena, with a voice trembling with pure fear. "There are men looking for me on every street corner. There are men working for Commissioner Evans. If I leave this room, if I do anything visible, then you go to the federal police legitimately." "For real," interrupted Richard, with truths cutting the air. "You are going to tell everything, absolutely everything about the conversation you heard, everything about Marcus and his confessions, everything about Victor Russo, everything about Commissioner Evans intentionally corrupting my restaurant." "They will kill me," whispered Elena with terrible certainty freezing her. "Maybe," replied Richard, and his brutal honesty was almost more frightening than any comforting lie. "Or maybe you are exactly what I need to destroy a man who deserves to be destroyed completely and without mercy. And maybe you discover you have more true strength than I ever imagined." The call was disconnected abruptly. Elena stood holding the perfect phone, heavy as lead in her trembling hand. She could stay in that room indefinitely like a voluntary prisoner. She could hide like a rat in a hole waiting for the cats. She could let Richard rot in a prison cell for crimes that hadn't occurred deliberately. She could live a small, safe, miserable life without importance to anyone. Or she could do what her mother had taught her since childhood with sacrifice and love. She could face immeasurable power, could say no with a firm voice. She took a deep breath through her nose, put the phone in her bag, put the backpack on her back, and left the motel to face her destiny. The entrance to the federal police station was monumental and cold. Large columns of smoked glass and industrial steel, immense windows offering a view of the big city and its kept secrets. A place that represented justice, but which Elena now knew to be a machine manipulated by corrupt men like Commissioner Evans, who used his uniform as a shield. When she pushed the heavy doors, all eyes turned to her like birds in repose waking up, because they didn't regularize who she was, but because there was something in her determined posture, in her visible conscience, suggesting she came to do something really important. Elena moved to the information desk where a young officer was writing reports on an old and slow desktop computer. "I need to make a formal complaint," said Elena, her voice firm despite the almost invisible tremor in her hands. "And I urgently need to speak with the official officer for the investigation of Richard Sterling. My name is Elena Vega, and I have critical information about a conspiracy to frame him for serious crimes he did not commit." The officer raised his eyes slowly, surprised by the revelation he had just heard. Before he could answer or call supervision, a voice echoed through the entire station like thunder. "Elena Vega, a man of approximately 65 years, with hair totally white like snow and eyes, looking empty of any genuine compassion, descended the main stairs with steps measuring power. It was Commissioner Evans in person. She recognized his face instantly from the old photographs in the Prestige restaurant. What completely unexpected joy. We have been looking for you insistently for days, asking ourselves where you had disappeared." "Looking?" asked Elena, her voice never missing a beat. "Why exactly did you send men to kill me or plan to do it yourself personally?" Absolute silence took over the entire station like a heavy tombstone. All police officers present stopped what they were doing. All eyes focused on Evans, as if watching a dangerous animal. The commissioner smiled, a smile that didn't reach his empty eyes. A predator's smile, knowing he can eat his prey because no one will question his authority. "You are a disturbed waitress," said Evans, his voice silky and deadly dangerous. A woman who has perhaps experienced a violent psychotic break, perhaps has voices that don't exist, perhaps has confabulated complete stories of conspiracy that doesn't exist in any real world. These are the reports I received from people who know you deeply. Then ask the Prestige restaurant security to bring the digital recordings from the surveillance cameras, replied Elena with clarity, cutting the air. Ask Charles to speak honestly about the illicit operations. Ask any employee of that place to tell the truth under oath. Cameras were erased, said Evans, easily, as if it were a known common truth. Employees have completely different stories. And you? He moved toward her until he was so close she could feel his warm and fetid breath. You are an accuser without substantial proof. A woman whose word against mine is worth nothing in a courtroom with. A real judge. In that instant, charged with electricity and pure tension, the station doors sounded inward again, this time with real force and authority. Two men with authentic federal agent badges advanced into the interior majestically, accompanied by a federal judge Elena didn't recognize in his black robe of supreme authority. "Commissioner Evans," said one of the agents with a professional tone, "you are being formally arrested for proven systematic corruption, conspiracy to commit premeditated murder, and documented involvement with massive-scale international organized crime. You have the inalienable right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law." Evans' face paled visibly. His eyes searched for an escape that didn't exist in any possible parallel universe. And then, in that moment of complete vulnerability and despair, Elena heard a voice she knew well coming from the main stairs of the station. It was Richard Sterling, descending the steps with the impossible grace of someone who had never been defeated, even though he had spent days in a federal prison cell. Beside him was a man of approximately 50 years, impeccably dressed in a $1,000 suit, with eyes suggesting absolute power, strategy, and intelligence, plus more technical knowledge about justice than any court could contain. "Federal Agent Santos," said Richard, addressing intentionally one of the men who had entered with authority. "I have the immediate pleasure of informing you that Commissioner Evans present here is the head of a network involving international trafficking of sophisticated false documents, laundering of money without detectable traces, and active conspiracy for premeditated murder, and possible digital and irrefutable evidence proving every accusation. Indisputably." "How did you manage?" began Commissioner Evans with panic showing through. "You made a strategic mistake of underestimating the people around you," replied Richard calmly. "And the biggest mistake was underestimating a waitress who had only 2 months in a restaurant and even so found the courage to do exactly what no one else would have done." The security camera blinked red like a machine eye, observing everything. Elena understood in that revealed instant that there were surveillance cameras throughout the Prestige restaurant that were not connected to the main system Evans had deleted. There were backup copies on distant servers. There were records that survived because someone smart and very rich had thought to anticipate exactly this kind of malignant conspiracy. The truth had triumphed. The following days were a permanent blur of congested courts, astute and sophisticated lawyers, frenetic journalists, and stories growing ever larger and more sensationalist with every passing hour. The media exploded with scandals never before seen on such a large scale. A corrupt federal commissioner captured in his own station before witnesses. An international crime. Network exposed publicly for the whole nation to see, and at the center of it all, a 25-year-old waitress who had said no to a system that thought it could swallow her perfectly. Richard Sterling was released immediately from all suspicions and unfounded accusations. All charges were formally withdrawn in official documents. His reputation was restored in official communiqué reaching the media, but he didn't return immediately to his life of luxury and immeasurable power. Instead, he appeared personally in Elena's office at the federal station, where she had been taken to give an extensive and detailed formal deposition. "You saved me," said Richard simply, with genuineness showing in every word, "not just from certain and imminent death, but from permanent guilt that would haunt me. You imagined an entire corrupted system alone. You were in visceral fear, absolute isolation, very real possibility of violent death, and you didn't back down once." Elena looked at this man who had offered management of a restaurant and now offered something much bigger, genuine respect from someone who knows true trust. "What happens to me now?" said Elena with hope and fear, mixed in her voice. "That depends completely on you," replied Richard with a tone suggesting freedom of choice. "I can offer you an extraordinary and generous deal. Executive Vice President of Operations for Sterling Hospitality, my entire corporation, not just one restaurant. You would have a salary that would fundamentally change your mother's life. You would have real power to change how people are treated in every establishment under my administration. Or you can refuse completely. Leave now, and I will respect your decision as a worthy person who deserves to choose her destiny." Elena took a deep breath through her nose, visualizing her mother's face in her mind with perfect clarity. Martha, who had spent decades cleaning mansions of rich people, who had taught that dignity had a price worth absolutely everything. "I accept," said Elena without hesitating, but with an absolutely non-negotiable condition. "Which one?" said Richard with genuine interest stamped on his face. "That my mother never works as a housekeeper again if she absolutely doesn't want to do it. That she has true and deserved comfort. That she knows her lessons meant something real in this corrupt world." Richard offered a genuine, deep smile of someone who finally understands what true wealth and unshakable respect mean. "Done," he replied without hesitating or questioning. "Absolutely done and sealed." On that special night, when Elena went home discreetly to be with her mother, Martha was waiting nervously at the small window of the modest apartment. Martha had seen the news on all television channels. She had seen her daughter on every television broadcast for hours. She had finally understood the size of the courage she had taught with personal sacrifice and unconditional love. When Elena entered the small and modest house where she had grown up and learned about honest life, Martha ran to her arms, tears running abundantly down her face wrinkled by time and hard work. "You can try," whispered Martha, repeating the mantra that had been the backbone of both for so many years of struggles. "But you won't manage to stop us now." 6 months after a storm had completely enthralled the city, the prestige restaurant had been transformed completely in its essence and purpose. Under Elena's firm leadership, who now held the official title of Executive Vice President of Operations for the entire corporation, it had become not just a place of refined material luxury, but a place of sincere and deep integrity. Employees were treated with inviolable respect and fair evolution. Customers were treated with transparent honesty. There was no place for corruption, for cynicism, for anything staining established integrity. And on that special and significant night, the restaurant was full of guests of honor, meticulously selected. There were no paying customers on that sacred day. There were only those who genuinely deserved to be there. Charles, the previous manager who had learned the final lesson of humility, had been offered the opportunity to stay or leave forever. He opted to stay and redeem himself personally, and under Elena's dedicated supervision, had become a better and more integral man. He had confessed his previous knowledge about illicit operations to competent authorities, and in legitimate exchange for his voluntary cooperation, received relative amnesty. Now he worked as human resources manager, personally making sure every employee was treated with absolute dignity. Thomas, the head of security who had helped Elena escape that night of chaos and danger, had been promoted to head of corporate security for the entire international operation. His loyalty wasn't to easy money, but to what was morally right, and that made him absolutely invaluable. Commissioner Evans was in maximum security federal prison, sentenced to 25 years of incarceration for his proven crimes. His entire network had been dismantled methodologically, and with it had disappeared the corruption that had infected not just the prestige restaurant, but multiple institutions in the entire city. On that special night of celebration, Richard moved to Elena while she observed the restaurant absolutely full of people who mattered. You transformed this, said Richard, gesturing to the space around them with genuine admiration. You transformed not just this physical place, but the way all my operations function now on a global scale. People in my entire multinational corporation speak about the same inviolable principles your mother taught you with sacrifice. Money doesn't buy genuine respect. Humiliating the weak has a terrible price. I just did what was right, replied Elena with true humility. That is exactly the deep problem, said Richard. Doing what is right should be absolutely common, but it is too rare in this world, and those who do it often pay a terrible price. You deserve more than an executive position. You deserve a night like this, a place of supreme honor, of public recognition, of true respect. In that magical and transforming instant, Martha appeared beside Elena in her best dress. Her mother now wore imported fine clothes. Her hair had gained professional color and shine. Her eyes kept that special shine of someone who had finally rested completely from the heavy work of an entire life. She placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder with radiant and visible pride. She always had true courage, said Martha to Richard with a choked voice. I always had deep fear that this cruel world would break her completely, but instead it was she who courted the entire system. Over the next intense month, Elena's story became legend throughout the international corporation. New employees learned not just about corporate procedures, but about the priceless value of saying no, of protecting the weak, of maintaining integrity even when the price was very high. A waitress who saved a millionaire became a universal symbol that a person, a courageous individual, could really change structures. But for Elena, the greatest reward wasn't the expressive salary or the elegant title. It was the night she arrived home and saw her mother sitting on a real comfortable sofa without sharp pain in her knees from so many years of heavy physical work, without that eternal fatigue that had been her constant companion for so long. Seeing Martha smiling genuinely, finally rested to live her life. And it was on that quiet and sacred night that Elena completely understood what good. Her mother had always had the option of teaching her with dedication and sacrifices. That humiliation had a terrible price, yes, but it also had an absolute limit. And he who tried to humiliate the weak eventually discovered he had significantly underestimated the strength of genuine character, had underestimated the silent courage of those who had nothing material to lose because they had already lost absolutely everything. 3 years after all this transformation, Richard retired completely from daily management of his immense corporate empire. He formally offered the presidency to Elena, and she accepted without hesitating, not because she wanted power for power's sake, but because she knew she could use it to ensure no one else had to live in fear, that no one else had to be humiliated just because they didn't have wealth, that no one else had to choose between security and honesty. And in every decision she took, every policy she implemented, every employee she protected, Elena heard her mother's voice echoing, "You can try, but you won't manage to humiliate those who fight honestly. Not while I am here, not while there are people willing to say no." 10 years passed since that planned night, when Elena warmly intercepted the glass of poisoned wine at the prestige restaurant. A whole decade of transformation, growth, and impact echoing through the entire Sterling Corporation and far beyond its domains. Elena was now an executive president of one of the largest hospitality corporations in the country. And the prestige restaurant had become not just a symbol of luxury, but a living monument to integrity and dignity. Elena's story had become legendary in management universities, in business ethics courses, in seminars on transforming leadership. She was frequently invited to speak at international conferences about how a common person can make an extraordinary difference in an affected world. But for Elena, none of that mattered as much as what she had achieved away from the spotlight. Martha, her mother, had finally rested after a lifetime of hard work. She lived now in a beautiful house Elena had bought for her, spending days in her garden, cultivating flowers and fruits, receiving friends for afternoon tea. The pain in her knees had disappeared after quality surgeries paid with the first fortune Elena had earned. More important than the absence of physical pain was the presence of genuine peace in her eyes. Martha had seen her daughter not just thrive, but transform entire lives. On that special morning, when the sun penetrated the windows of Elena's presidential office on the 43rd floor of the corporation building, she received an unexpected visit. It was Charles, the original manager who had feared for his life during all those days of conspiracy. But Charles was now a transformed man. Years had passed working in the rehabilitation of corporate crimes, helping them understand the real cost of corruption. He had become a passionate defender for business integrity. "President Elena," said Charles with genuine respect, "I came to bring news I thought you would like to know. The foundation you created in my name helped more than 10,000 children from poor families this year, all learning about ethics, dignity, and the true value of character." Elena happily embraced Charles with sincere affection. What had started as a humiliating confrontation had transformed into a partnership of genuine redemption. That man, who had been an involuntary accomplice in corruption, had become one of her greatest allies in creating a better world. Thomas, the head of security who helped Elena escape that fateful night, had ascended to vice president of corporate security. But his work now was quite different. He trained protection teams that not only guarded properties but also protected corporate crime whistleblowers. He had created a program where security guards and protection agents learned about social justice and the importance of standing by the weak. On that afternoon, when Elena sat in her office observing the city through the wide window, she received a call that would lead to deep reflections. It was a young woman introducing herself as an investigative reporter. An international corruption network extending far beyond that initial case had been discovered, and she requested Elena's help for a public exposure. "Yes," said Elena immediately. "Let's do this together, because if I learned something on that night at the restaurant, it was that silence and inaction were forms of complicity, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear, and that a person could really make a difference if they were willing to pay the price." 15 years after the initial incident, the world had changed. Significantly thanks to Elena's actions, not just in her corporation but in the entire country. Whistleblowers were now protected by law. Denouncers of corporate crimes received government protection. Business supervision programs were implemented in hundreds of corporations. It all started because a 25-year-old waitress hadn't said here. On that special night, when Elena was visited by Richard Sterling, who was now completely retired and enjoying a life as a philanthropist, he brought a surprise. "Elena," said Richard, "I and a group of businessmen decided to create an award, an annual award, honoring people who made extraordinary sacrifices for integrity and justice. It will be called the Elena Vega Award, and you will be the first honoree." Elena cried. For the first time in many years, she cried for real, not of sadness, but of deep understanding that her life was important, that moment of courage had unleashed a cascade of changes that still kept growing. Martha, now with hair completely white but eyes still extended with strength, was there to witness. She placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder, as she had done so many times, and whispered those words repeated for so many years. "You can try, but you won't manage to humiliate those who fight honestly." 20 years after that night at the Prestige restaurant, Elena was interviewing candidates for the position of executive vice president. It was a young woman of 27 years, daughter of a rural worker. Elena saw in her eyes something familiar, that mixture of fear and confidence, of uncertainty and determination. "Why do you think you deserve this position?" asked Elena. "I am not sure I deserve it," replied the young woman, "but I have integrity, and my mother taught me that matters more than anything." Elena smiled. The cycle continued. Courage spread from person to person, like flame from candle to candle. What had started as an act of resistance in a restaurant had transformed into a movement of social transformation. "Welcome to the corporation," said Elena. "I believe you make a big difference." Because in truth, Elena finally understood true power never came from money or status. It came from the courage of an individual who was willing to say no. It came from someone who understands that dignity had no price. It came from simple, common people who simply refused to bow before injustice. And while Elena looked at that young woman, she saw herself on that imminent night, when she was just a waitress trembling with fear. but absolutely determined to do what was right. The legacy wasn't about power, it was about courage. And courage was the only currency that really mattered in this world. 30 years later, when Elena was 55 years old, she retired from the position of executive president. The Sterling Corporation transformed into a global empire of integrity, where every employee's word mattered, where whistleblowers were protected, where corruption was pulled out by the root. Systematically. On the day of her retirement, more than 5,000 people gathered in the main auditorium to honor her. There were executives, employees, politicians, activists for human rights. All had been somehow touched by Elena's influence. When she went up to the stage, the first face she saw was her mother's. Martha, now 85 years old, still shone with pride and love. She sat in the first row as she had been since the beginning. "You can try," said Elena to the crowd, repeating the words her mother taught her when she was a child. "But you won't manage to humiliate those who fight." Honestly, an entire crowd stood to applaud because they understood now. They understood it wasn't about an extraordinary woman, it was about an ordinary woman who had found extraordinary courage inside herself. And that was the true legacy of Elena Vega. It wasn't corporate power, it was the living proof that a person, just one, could make a deep difference. That courage is contagious, that integrity is important, and that it is never too late to say no to injustice. End of story.